open this in. Just gonna have to like trust that because there is no viewfinder on my phone. Shout out to OnePlus for not at all sponsoring, but facilitating this video. Hello and welcome back to this absolute zombie of a YouTube channel. So as you can see from the title of this video, this is JET interview tips for ALTs and CIRs. I myself was an ALT for 3 years, so that's my personal experience. But the thing that makes this video a little bit different is I know somebody who shall remain anonymous, who was on the 2021 interview panels in North America. So I was able to talk to this person about what being on the other side of the table was like and what they're looking for in an interviewee, is that a word? A candidate, and basically how things work from the other side of the table. So I'm gonna start off with my advice from my experience and the experience of other people who I've spoken to who've been through this process. And sort of as I go over that, I'm going to be throwing in little tips and interjections from the person who I spoke to. We spent like 2 hours on the phone yesterday going over this, going over my notes. They made a bunch of comments and little things here and there. So if you see me like looking down and reading, I have my notes here on my computer that I am referring to because your girl is not an encyclopedia, much as I may wish I were. Okay, let's get into this. Part 1 is your appearance. Though we wish they didn't, appearances do matter. There's nothing we can do about that. You don't want to change who you are for this interview. Don't change your image or pretend to be something you're not. My number 1 tip is to be yourself professionally. What that means is don't turn yourself into what you think is the ideal candidate looks-wise if it doesn't represent who you actually are on a day-to-day basis. Because JET is interviewing you to see if they want to hire you, not some character that you created for the interview process. With that said, you do want to be professional. So what that means is if you have long hair, just get it out, just get it out of your face. Because if you're like in the interview and you're kind of like, I don't know, you got your hair in your face or like kind of stuck to your mouth, or if you're like fiddling with it, don't do that. It doesn't matter what type of hair you have or what type of style, if it's dyed, shaved here, whatever, that doesn't matter. Just get it like out of your face so that, you know, you look like you showed up here on purpose with your hair out of your face. Have good posture. This is something I suck at. Maybe like shoulders back, head up, eye contact, pleasant neutral expression on your face. And of course, absolutely none of that is going to make or break your interview. It's just my advice to put your best foot forward and make a good impression. Something that's a bit more important is your clothing. Make sure that your clothes are clean, unwrinkled, and they fit you. If you have a 3-piece suit that's 2 sizes too big, it's gonna look a lot worse than if you have a simple blazer that fits. And speaking of suits and blazers, no, it doesn't have to be black. I see this question on the JET Reddit all the time. What if I don't have a black suit? Like, is navy okay? Is pinstripes okay? Is, you know, dark maroon okay? The answer, quite frankly, is yes, it's fine. It doesn't have to be black. It can even be colorful, as long as you sort of dress it with an air of professionalism. Maybe don't go for hot pink or like neon green or something like that, but like even this sweater I think would be fine with a jacket over it. Obviously, I'm not wearing a jacket, this isn't an interview, but it's okay to have some color if it expresses your personality. Again, that is the main purpose of this, to see who you are as a person. So if you're not the kind of person who wears a white shirt, black suit, then don't be something you're not. Also, an aside would be, if you're going to wear a tie, maybe don't wear a black tie. My interviewer contact told me that they don't really care about the color of the tie because the interview is happening in your home country and not in Japan. But it is good to know, if you're a person who wears ties, that once you get to Japan, that black tie, just don't even pack it. Well, maybe pack it, but never wear it, because it's specifically used only for funerals. Black suit, black tie, white shirt means I'm at a funeral in Japan. So you're gonna want like a muted color or something like that for any professional or business relations in Japan that aren't related to people people passing away. Some other tips from my interviewer contact for people who like to have their nails done: don't have like crazy colors or things like that for the interview. Professional French tip, or like a nude is probably fine. That's my opinion. That's not what they said, but this person doesn't really do their nails, so they probably wouldn't notice, you know, if it's like a pale pink or a taupe or something like that. Also, please check your teeth. My contact said that they interviewed someone yesterday who had a bit of spinach in their teeth, and it was distracting because they kept looking at the spinach, but then it was like weird because they didn't want to like say something and embarrass the person. And it's just, check your teeth before you go in for your interview, whether it be in person or on Zoom. Speaking of, here are some tips for a Zoom interview. Many consulates are doing interviews via Zoom this year because of the global pandemic. Not sure if you've heard about that one yet. First, test your equipment, lighting, internet, etc. Test it ahead of time. I know this is a bit much coming from a person in this terribly lit small room, but just know that if I was still on the JET program, I would have the money to provide you with better lighting. So if you have the ability to, I would set up a Zoom call with a friend to like check your lighting and your camera and your background and just be like, hey friend, can you hear me? Is my connection all right? Do you see anything weird in the background? We've all seen the viral videos of people who are on important conferences and they've got like people coming in and out, children, pets, a dildo on the bookshelf in the background. Save yourself the worry and just check it out ahead of time. Just be like, is there anything here? Is there anything here? No? Fine. That said, if you are in a small space or a small room and there is stuff in the background, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Just make sure there's nothing weird going on. Tidy your bookshelf if it's a bookshelf. Remove any like cups, plates, trash, things like that. Clear the surface if you can. If you've got like photographs of people, maybe move those because like the faces might be distracting. But like if you can see your bed in the background or anything like that, doors, it's fine. People understand that you are in a pandemic, stuck in your room, trying to do a job interview. They're not expecting you to have cinematic quality green screen happening in your home. Don't stress about that. Also, you might want to wear pants in case they ask you to stand up. I'm kind of breaking my own rule. I'm wearing like sweatpants, so like basically don't do what I'm doing. Wear like professional pants because my contact said that they're not likely to ask you to do a mock lesson because the interviews are being conducted over Zoom. But I have seen online some people saying that they were asked to do them even on Zoom. So just like wear pants, just in case. My contact told me that if you are having issues with your technology and you let them know, they will work with you. If you oversleep or something and you miss your time slot, no sympathy. But if you're having issues with connectivity or your microphone or your camera or whatever, email your consulate, call your consulate, try to talk to a human person because they will work with you. Especially in the US right now, Texas has just been going through a crisis. It's unprecedented times with these Zoom interviews. Don't assume that there is no mercy just because you're feeling stressed. Keep in contact with the human person at your consulate. Let them know what's going on. Take a breath. They will work with you. Those of you who are familiar with the online situation of Zoom, even if your connection is working perfectly, because of the nature of Zoom and the fact that it's being transmitted over the internet, nothing is instantaneous. So I would advise you to speak a little bit more slowly than you normally would and with a conscious effort on your diction, because even if the sound quality you think is going to be good, sometimes it comes out the other side. Like if their speakers are weird, things aren't going to be 100% clear 100% of the time. And when you finish speaking or when somebody finishes speaking, take a breath. before you start speaking, just in case someone's already talking, but your internet hasn't like caught up yet. Also, I would advise you to have some water nearby, but only drink it if you need it. Don't be sitting there in your interview like, yeah, 3 things I would bring from my hometown to introduce my culture to the people of Japan. Yeah, nobody likes that. But if you've been talking a lot, your throat feels a bit dry, you need a sip of water, it's fine. Human beings need water. This next Zoom tip is for people who don't live alone. If you're living by yourself, it's probably not too big of a deal to figure out the best place in your home, in your apartment, to set up, get the lighting, whatever, and just like be a nuisance to nobody. But if you have roommates, this can get a little bit more tricky. For example, I waited until my roommate was out today to film this. I'm talking really loudly, and that door behind me isn't really a door, it's a wall between our bedrooms, and if she were here, I would be annoying the out of her, I guarantee you. So, out of respect, I waited for her to leave because this is not like a really important life-changing opportunity. But your interview for the JET program is kind of a big deal, and it's important that you make sure you have as few interruptions as possible. So you should talk to the people you live with. Let them know what time you're going to be having your interview, and I don't think it's too much to ask to say, hey, could you please be wearing headphones at that time? Maybe download whatever Netflix or podcast ahead of time so that you're not using streaming on the internet at the same time, so the internet can be as freed up for your interview as possible. Maybe even go so far as to ask them if they can leave the apartment. That said, we are in a global pandemic, so not asking your roommates to leave, I think if you can avoid it, is better. I mean, if you're in, New Zealand or whatever, tell them to go to the park. They don't need to stay home, because you guys, you just really did a great job with that, didn't you? If your roommates can safely leave the apartment for half an hour, maybe ask them to do so. If not, just ask them to please be mindful of the fact that you're on a really important job interview. Put on the headphones, do something, quiet activity, maybe don't practice the guitar for half an hour. I'm sure any reasonable roommate would take that request and say, sure, you got it, cohabitator. My last Zoom tip from my contact on the interview panel said that you should say thank you before you leave your breakout room to go back to the main consulate waiting room. The way that a lot of these interviews are working is you'll join the Zoom call and you'll just be in this like big sort of lobby with all the other candidates. And when it's your turn, they'll put you in a breakout room, which if you've done Zoom, you know what that is. If you're new to Zoom, welcome. A breakout room is basically when they take like a few people from the main group and move them to their own sub-call, sub-chat, sub-conference. So it'll be you and then the 3 panelists alone in a little sub-video conference. And then when you finish, you will leave the sub-conference and go back to the main conference where the people from the consulate will check in, dot your I's, cross your T's, let you know when to expect to hear from them, and send you on your way. So before you leave that little sub-video conference, give them a smile, say thank you for your time, off you trot. So that brings us into the meat of the interview itself, your content and execution, how to do the thing. First off, how does the interview work? You are going to be faced with a panel of 3 interviewers. 1 Japanese teacher of English. So this is a Japanese person who teaches English as a job. 2, a person from the consulate where you are applying through. So a member of staff from the consulate. And 3, an alumni, someone who has already done the program, finished their time, returned to their home country, and is now on an interview panel. That 3rd position, the alumni, is the position of the contact who I spoke to about this interview process. If you're applying as an ALT, that 3rd person, that JET alumni, could either be an ALT or a CIR. If you're applying as a CIR, that 3rd person alumni will definitely be a CIR. So you can be sure that at least one person in the room knows exactly what kind of job you're applying for and knows whether or not you'll be a good fit for the program. The number one piece of advice I got from my contact is this: not having a clear purpose is almost as bad as not having a personality. So what this means is the people who are coming into the program who seem like they're just doing it to collect stamps for their passports, or conversely, people who have never ever traveled ever or had any experience in teaching, those people, if you can't express a clear reason why you chose to go on the JET program itself, then that is a bit of a red flag. So if you're like, oh, I couldn't decide between Korea and Japan and China, and I didn't know where I wanted to teach English, I just figured somewhere, and here I am. That is not very definitive purpose. You want to say, why Japan? Why the JET program specifically? What drew you to this opportunity and not any other random opportunity to go abroad? If you're a person who has never traveled, never done any kind of teaching before in their life, that was me when I applied. I literally did not even have a passport until like 6 months before departure to Japan. I got one in January of the year that I applied. If you're that type of person, then just let them know why you were ready for this adventure, why you decided you want to go to Japan. Make sure it's specific. In the interview, there's a good chance they'll ask you something from your statement of purpose or from your application in general. My contact said that they definitely are keeping an eye out for things in your application that you have lied about. This does not mean like a slight discrepancy or something you forgot or like a detail, nothing like that. If you just like left out a detail or something, that is fine. But if you say in your application, I have N1 level Japanese, and then they ask you, what time did you wake up this morning in Japanese, and you can't answer, that's a straight up lie, that's a red flag, and that could really count against you. The people who are interviewing you have read your entire application very thoroughly. So they will know if you are completely fabricating something that was not in your application. So it doesn't hurt to maybe the day before your interview or even the morning before, take out your application materials, your statement of purpose, give them a read through, refresh what you talked about, just have it in your mind so that if they ask you a question about it, you know where to go with that answer. So if you have looked on the internet, I'm sure you're aware that there are tons of lists of possible JET interview questions online floating around that you can sort of read through and become familiar with. I definitely did this before my interview back in 2016, and there was a question on there, on that list, that I was asked in my interview. What was it? What book would you show to the people of Japan in order to introduce your home country's culture? Something like that. And my interview panel was very excited about the fact that I come from an acting and musical theater background. So they were like, oh, actually, I don't want to know about a book. I'd like to know what play or musical you would recommend to people to watch to introduce the culture of your country and teach about your country. So if you have a specialized degree or like some sort of knowledge base that is different from the norm application, like education or something like that, then be prepared for questions that pertain to your knowledge base. To be honest, I was very happy about that because I really do not read any nonfiction books like at all. If you want to know my paranormal romance Rex, I got you, but that is like really not appropriate or helpful in a JET interview. It's also possible that you might get some questions about the current situation globally. My contact said that they didn't ask any questions about coronavirus, but I've seen some people chatting online that they've gotten questions like, how would you address remote learning or social distancing in classrooms, and what sort of activities would you suggest or policies would you implement in order to facilitate the current state of the world? So maybe give that like a 5-minute think. It's not a big thing, but it might come up. Also, more of a small thing, but an important thing nonetheless, is don't call the Japanese panelists by their first names. My contact said that someone did this in an interview, and it was really awkward because it not only made the Japanese person kind of uncomfortable, but it also showed that that person who did that didn't really have an understanding of how Japanese culture works, like the basics of formality and respect that people expect in a formal situation in Japan. And basically they were saying that, like, if you make a mistake as simple as this, it shows that you really haven't done any research on the country that you're planning on moving to for a year or more. So according to my contact, your personality, motivation, and genuine understanding of the JET program are the most important things to put forward in your interview. This means to be personable to the best of your abilities, to be open, receptive, communicative, clear, and to show a genuine understanding of what the JET program really is. It's about grassroots international relations and building a relationship between your home country and Japan. The people that they want are not the lifers, the people who want to go to Japan, get married, settle down, stay forever, never leave. They want people who are enthusiastic about Japan and their home country, who will come to Japan and create bonds, spread awareness, gain an understanding and appreciation for Japan, and then go home and tell everyone what an amazing time they had. That is the true purpose of the JET program. So if you can talk about how you would love to create international friendships and relationships and learn and grow from your experience and use your knowledge of your home country to help you in Japan, and then use what you learn in Japan to then benefit you in your career moving forward in your home country, those are the kinds of things that will put you a step ahead in terms of standing out in the interview. And your personality can be a deciding factor in whether or not you get through. If there are two candidates who both have kind of the same level of experience, then the one who seems more personable, more open, more adaptable, more willing to work with others, that person is going to be a step above in the panel's eyes. For those of you who are interviewing as ALTs, don't shy away from the Japanese portion of the interview. Remember that if you make mistakes in this portion, it doesn't count against you. It will only give you extra sprinkles on top of the ice cream cone that is your application. Even if you don't know very much Japanese, just try your best, because it shows at least that you're willing to try. If you refuse outright to do the Japanese portion, it doesn't necessarily count against you, but it does definitely leave a negative impression on the panel. This last section is kind of miscellaneous advice from my panelist contact, with a few things peppered in here and there from my experience as well. The panelists are actually rooting for you. They want you to succeed. The majority of people, if they have common sense and go in honestly and put their best foot forward, are not going to run into issues until they start messing things up actively, if that makes sense. My contact said that the reason you hear these crazy stats of like, oh, only 20% of people make it through the interview stage is quite honestly because a lot of people who are applying just completely lack common sense in certain areas and shoot themselves in the foot before they've even walked in the door. In terms of placement, your placement requests have very little effect on where you're actually going to end up unless they have something to do with your health or your family or things like that. For example, if you have a family member already living in Japan, the panel will actively try to put you there. The panel is not the people who decide where you're going to be placed, but they do make notes that then get sent with your interview results to DC, so they can write in the notes recommendations for where to put you, and if you have family in Japan, they will probably advocate more for you to go near that family member. Otherwise, if you have a special medical condition or something like that where you need to be near a certain facility for treatment, in those cases, they will probably make a note But if you are, true story, just saying that you want to go to Osaka because you love takoyaki, you're probably not gonna end up in Osaka. Shocker. If you have a preference for, say, cities versus countryside, and you talk about that a little bit, it's fine, but really, truly do not expect to be able to specifically request anything outside of being near family or being near medical treatment options. By the time you have an interview, your interview has already gone through a scoring process. When you first send it in, it is scored based on what you've put on paper. And the interview panelists see that score before they meet you. So they already have a rough evaluation of how you look on paper before you walk in the door or join the breakout room. After your interview, they will also give you a score and put that together with your previous score, and both of those scores are sent to DC, who then decides which candidates will make it onto the short list or the alternate list, or will be below the threshold and rejected. According to my contact, during the interview phase, no two candidates from the same panel are allowed to have the same score. So, for example, if that panel interviewed 10 people that day and 2 of them scored, let's say, a 75. We can't have 2 people who have the same score of 75 from the same panel. So they will go through and decide if one of them will be bumped to 76 or one will be bumped down to 74. So make sure that you're doing everything you can so that if you come head to head with another candidate from your panel, you might just get that edge to be 1 point higher. Those cutoff thresholds, you never know where they're going to be at between shortlist and alternate, between alternate and rejection. And that 1 point somewhere down the line might make all the difference. Don't be creepy. This is a bit of a weird one, but if you're going to Japan because you want to date the locals, maybe don't bring it up in the interview. Maybe just don't be creepy like that in the first place, but if you must be, don't bring it up in the interview in any way, shape, or form. My contact said that there were some people who made it pretty clear that they wanted to go to Japan for all the wrong reasons, and they will just put you in the no pile. They have the power to do that, to just give you a low score. I really don't recommend this person in the notes section. I firmly am against this. So don't be creepy. Just don't do it. They also said not to be monotone when you're talking. If you are talking to your panel and you just have one tone of voice, you probably won't stand out very much among the other candidates. You might become forgettable. Put a little bit of friendliness into your vibe if you can. Have a cup of coffee, get up early, stretch, be ready. Speaking of the panelists seeing multiple people throughout a day, yes, you probably will be compared to the other people that the panel saw that day, but that is just the way things go. Back in 2016, when I was applying for the JET program, I was actually applying along with my best friend. We were both applying at the same time. We both had the same major, same Japanese background, similar. She had been abroad a lot more than I had, but we had similar levels of experience basically. And we knew that on paper, we were very similar candidates. So we strategically booked our interviews to be at the exact same time as each other, thinking if we do this, we'll definitely be in separate panels. So we won't be speaking to the same people and they won't be able to compare us to each other. So it's good to know 5 years later that that was actually a valid strategy. If you're applying for the ALT position, obviously a big part of teaching English is going to be your knowledge of English in the first place, your grammar, as well as your ability to speak in a way that you can get your ideas across clearly and concisely without talking too quickly, mumbling, that kind of thing. So if you're applying to be an ALT, there is a possibility that the alumni on the panel is specifically looking out for the way that you're speaking and the words that you're using to make sure that you sound like you are able to teach English in a classroom. Another tip from my contact is that in each panel, try to identify the dominant personality. So this means the person who is engaging with you the most, asking you the most questions, making the most notes. Look for the person who is really driving the interview and play to that person. I'm not saying to forget about the other people on the panel, because it's important to address everyone and include everyone in your conversation. But if there's a person who is really honing in, make sure that you give that person attention, because after you leave the interview, they will discuss why you should or shouldn't be recommended. And if you can get people on your side to like you and advocate for you, you're going to have a better chance of being put through. Questions. Be prepared for the questions that they might ask you, but also prepare your own questions to ask the panelists. They will give you time at the end, and if you ask the right questions, it can really look good for you as a candidate. So I asked my contact and they gave me some do's and some don'ts. Do not ask about specific details. For example, how do I get my driver's license? What should I pack or not pack when moving to a foreign country? Honestly, those are the kinds of questions that you can ask the internet, pop into Google or Reddit. The panelists don't have all day to be answering these small minutiae. That's what the internet is for. How many students are there in each class? What level will I be teaching? Elementary, junior high, high school? When will I find out my results? Will there be other foreigners in my town? How can I save money? How much vacation will I get? When will I get my first paycheck? What's my rent going to be like? Questions like this are things that you should not be worried about right now. It just shows that you're sort of jumping the gun, or you haven't really done your research on how the process works. These are questions that you are going to want to ask your predecessor after you've already gotten your placement. So this might not happen until May, June, mid-July. Once you know who your predecessor is, that is when you're going to want to start asking these questions, when you're in direct contact with your predecessor and your contracting organization. No one else is going to be able to answer you. All they're going to do is give you the equally evasive and frustrating answer of every situation is different. Now let's talk about some do ask questions. For this section, remember that on your panel, you have a person who has already been through this process, who has gone to Japan, done the job, and returned with first-hand experience. So you can ask questions like, what qualities do you think make a good jet? How have you developed professionally or linguistically since being on the program? What is your number one piece of advice for incoming jets? How would you describe your time in the program in 3 words or less? Maybe ask the JTE what they think are the best qualities in a co-teacher in an ALT. Basically, any question where you are kind of turning the interview around, where you can ask the interviewers about their own experiences and show that you value the advice of the panelists. That said, you do want to keep this section fairly brief, maybe ask 1 or 2 questions just to show that you've done your homework, but not to take up too much of their time. To round this out, I just want to say, relax. Try not to sweat it too much. All of the information on the internet about these interviews, it always seems like they're this big, scary, daunting ordeal. But to be honest, it's a job interview. And for some people, this can seem really scary because it might be your first time or one of your first times interviewing for a job like this in such a professional setting. But it honestly isn't something that you should be stressing about, that you should be losing sleep over or worrying too much about. Just familiarize yourself with your application. Remember why you applied in the first place. Tap into that reason you have for wanting to go to Japan. Remember why you are interested in teaching or interpreting or tourism, international relations. Remember your purpose and put your best self forward. And when it's over, water off a duck's back. If you got in, you got in. If you didn't, there are always other ways to get to Japan. I'm going to leave this video here. I'm sure it's already a lot longer than I intended it to be, because that always seems to happen when I just sit down and talk. If you have any questions about the JET program or life in Japan in general, drop them in the comments, send them my way. I will do my best to answer them. Big shout out and thank you to my anonymous source. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, go ahead and thumbs down. It's a free world. Subscribe, check out the other videos on my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and good luck with your interviews.